Earlier this year, however, things changed, and changed significantly. Two things happened, which together make clear that LIBOR will no longer be available for any new contracts after the end of this year. That's just 86 days from now. Like here.
We are tracking SOFR very closely, rooting for its success. You know, I kind of watch CME futures, open interest volume, and that stuff. And I think the Eurodollar pits will transition over to SOFR, kind of like almost like a light switch. Like they're doing both in parallel now, but those will move over. I think OTC swaps are going to do the same. What are you watching to ensure that you have confidence in the liquidity in SOFR, particularly term SOFR, to really support the hundreds of trillions of dollars that are needed, that are going to be based off this rate, especially given that that rate has a lot of the controls that the Fed wants to see in a replacement rate for LIBOR?
So, you know, we are obviously monitoring. There was a chicken and the egg problem, again, as everyone in this room knows, with respect to term SOFR, which is that, you need a respectable number of transactions in order to generate the rate, but you can't really get the respectable number of transactions until a framework for the production of the rate exists. And so we chose to bite the bullet and supported the production of term SOFR, that announcement over the course of the summer.
Thank you for the help on SOFR legislation, for the safe harbor for tough legacy contracts that aren't quite so clear. And that legislation does stipulate SOFR in many of its iterations. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on sort of the need for that legislation, the progress of that legislation, what else, maybe from what you're hearing. We're working very closely with the Hill as an advocacy organization. We work very closely with your team and with the ARC, or members of the ARC, and Christie's very active in that, the details of those negotiations, which can be very intense and very technical.
So I guess to begin with, the legislation is critical. I didn't mention it in my speech, but by continuing the production of US dollar LIBOR through the middle of 2023, that will allow a substantial majority of existing contracts to run off. I think it has to be federal legislation. There has been an effort to have New York legislation. Yep. And I guess the legal issue is a little more complicated than I had originally thought. There are constitutional questions about whether a state can actually pass laws that affect contractual terms on existing contracts. I think the lawyers believe that there are ways around that the New York legislation can be effective, notwithstanding those constitutional questions, but there would inevitably be litigation around that. There are questions around it, and it's very clear what the federal government can do. Plus, New York can only affect contracts under New York law, which is most contracts, but not all.
Not all.
So federal legislation, I think, will be essential to ultimately solving this problem.